that this is very important, what we're fighting for. Because I'm tired, I'm really, really tired of the manipulation. I'm tired of how the press is manipulating everything that's been happening in this situation. They do not tell the truth, they're liars. And they manipulate our history books. The history books are not true. It's a lie. The history books are lying. You need to know that. You must know that.
Thing that we could say about African peoples is that we left evidence of ourselves all over this planet. And that's the problem with European scientists. The deeper they dig, the blacker the planet gets.
I am your teacher. You are a Negro.
No.
Suppose I threatened to beat you, what would you say? Aren't you a Negro now?
No.
What are you?
I'm black and beautiful.
What is your nationality?
My nationality is Afro-American.
Suppose I had some money in my pocket. Suppose I gave you $1 to say that you're an American Negro. This is money now. Money talks. Money talks. This $1. And if you don't say it, you don't get it. You're an American Negro, aren't you?
No.
You won't have any money. You know you need money, don't you?
Yes.
You need money to live, don't you?
Yes.
All right. All you have to say, Leon, is that you're an American Negro. Aren't you an American Negro?
You walk into any mosque in America and you just laid your hands on the first person or the third person or the fifth person that you see, you realize that you're laying your hands on a Native American. You realize that you're laying your hands on a Native American. You realize that you're laying your hands on a Native American. You realize that you're laying your hands on a Native American.
100 years later, the Negro is still languishing in the corners of American society and finds himself in exile in his own land. Now, have you ever wondered what that passage meant from Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech?
It's not a secret. However, with programming such as Roots, 12 Years a Slave,
you call an Afro a natural. Natural means to be naturally from America, not nationally from America. Naturally from America is to say that you are indigenous of America. Then you start to seeing it pop up all over the place. Now, the Afro-American is the first one to use the terminology of Afro. All right? Then Afro-Brazilians.
Who paid to, that shit costed a lot of money because Roots had famous actors in it. And, Roots was a long ass movie. Somebody made that movie. Just think about it. You cannot finance a movie like Roots and pay all those goddamn actors.
Change now. We're now getting 2015 is now. As African American, are you African? Oh hell, no, I ain't African.
They're not wrong though.
They're not wrong.
They're not wrong. No, are they right?
Right. Because but it's just the reaction.
Okay. True.
Now, and I could be a little sensitive because of how I grew up.
Okay, hold up. Here's
okay. But
this is going to answer that question. So the history of African Americans in America does not necessarily work in their favor based on everything that was logged. As you see all the movies, 12 Years a Slave, it's a constant reminder that, hey, African Americans, this is your story in America. When I was in Nigeria, I did not know of the African American story until I got to America and found out.
That's true.
Right? I did not know anything about slavery. Reminder that, hey, African Americans, this is your story in America. When I was in Nigeria, I did not know of the African American story until I got to America. Nigeria, I did not know of the African American story until I got to America and found out.
That's true.
Right? I did not know anything about slavery in Nigeria.
This new, fabulous discovery that is coming out. About 200 years before Christ, up until right at about the time of Christ, in other words, about 2,000 years ago, there now appears that there were wealthy West African and North African blacks who left Africa on a pilgrimage and came, if you can believe this or not, but there's solid proof for it now, to southern Illinois. Now I'll explain how that happened. In 1982, our time, there was a guy who was going along southern Illinois. He was a cave hunter. And he was, I don't know if you're familiar with southern Illinois at all, on the Ohio River, it's just honeycombed with caves, thousands of caves. They have not all been explored by any means. And he was involved in sports for hunting.
At the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight, o'er the ramparts we watched, were so gallant.
Vision? What do you know about my vision? My vision would turn your world upside down, tear us under your illusions, and send the sanctuary of your own ignorance crashing down around you. Now ask yourself, are you really ready to see that vision?
The chapel is dedicated to Santa Maria de los Buenos Aires. Saint Mary of the Good Winds was the patron saint of navigators and a favorite of Columbus. This altar painting dates from shortly after Columbus died and features what's considered the first and most accurate portrait of the great explorer on the left. It's also thought to be the first painting of Indians done in Europe. The Virgin's cape seems to protect everyone under it, even the Indians.
When I was reading to prepare for this interview, I was quite surprised to see you use the word Aborigines talking about African Americans.
You know, I've dealt with that issue. I've already, talked publicly about that.
And my purpose here today is to say that I'm very sorry, and I apologize to anyone whose feelings were hurt by my comment.
The meeting, probably 95% African American, and because of, things that I regret, offhand remark I should not have made.
Using the word Aborigines.
Right, offhand remark I should not have made.
American society, and finds himself in exile in his own land. In exile in his own land. In his own land.
The chapel is dedicated to Santa Maria de los Buenos Aires. Saint Mary of the Good Winds was the patron saint of navigators and a favorite of Columbus. This altar painting dates from shortly after Columbus died and features what's considered the first and most accurate portrait of the great explorer on the left. It's also thought to be the first painting of Indians done in Europe. The Virgin's cape seems to protect everyone under it, even the Indians.
Let common sense dictate to you. Common sense thing number one. You look at the movie Roots, and that started that whole snowball effect of trace your roots back to Africa. Okay, You look at all these documentaries that they talk about slavery. You know, it's one thing that you won't see from all of the stories that are told in those documentaries about slavery. None of the stories that are told tell anything as of when we came from Africa, the boat ride over, or anything prior to actually being sold. Nothing except there's no verbal evidence that has ever been stated about that. Minus the movie Roots, which, I mean, that was a lie anyway, that TV series. Alex Haley, he plagiarized that off something else. It came out later on, and that was after they made Roots Part 2. But anyway, you have to look, just try to look at things logically, okay? Now, if you look at this photo, this is how slaves were supposed to have been shipped over.
History of Thanksgiving.
See?
Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492, right? And then
that was the last thing you learned in school.
That's the only thing I learned in school.
Ah.
And then in the Virginia, he was settled in Virginia, and it's Plymouth Rock, and then they found some Native Americans. Someone planted a fish. And then
planted a fish?
Now,
Native Americans,
they taught them how to, you know.
You said he planted a motherfucking fish.
The Indians, yeah.
No,
but see what it was. Hey, what it was.
I'm glad you ain't
Columbus did not discover, you know, America
right.
when it was riding. You know what I mean?
Right.
It was the black man that seen it first.
It was the black man. He didn't land on Plymouth Rock.
Yeah.
You see, with Indians, there's absolutely nothing to be done. There's the same difference between a Negro and an Indian as there is between a dog and a coyote. You can put a dog on a leash, beat him, and he'll always be there to lick your feet. By many unsuccessful experiments. You see, with Indians, there's absolutely nothing to be done. There's the same difference between a Negro and an Indian as there is between a dog and a coyote. You can put a dog on a leash, beat him, and he'll always be there to lick your feet. Take away a coyote's liberty and you've cut off his air. An Indian will never be a slave. No one has ever been able to make them reproduce in captivity. They do not eat, they do not talk, they do not sleep, they do not make love. An Indian will never be a slave. No one has ever been able to make them reproduce in captivity. They do not eat, they do not talk, they do not sleep, they do not make love. An Indian will never be a slave. No one has ever been able to make them reproduce in captivity. They do not eat, they do not talk, they do not sleep, they do not make love.
To Google Images one day, I was high as fuck, and I just sat back and I was just thinking, like, man, what did indigenous people look like? What did native people look like? And I typed in native people and I typed in indigenous people, and in my opinion, all of them motherfuckers, they all either looked Asian, or I'm not gonna say Chinese, but like Asian, or they looked black, or they looked like a combination of the two. In my opinion, the Native Americans did look.
The Brazilian finds show that the New World was discovered tens of thousands of years earlier than previously believed, and certainly well before the time of the American Indians. But who then were these pioneers? A much earlier wave of Mongoloids? Or another race altogether? Clues to the identity of the first Americans are emerging in rock shelters in the northeast and southeast of Brazil. Archaeologists have recently unearthed human remains. Prehistoric skulls were found buried in layers of soil, 9 to 12,000 years old. They are the oldest skulls in the Americas. And this is the oldest of them all. The skull of a young woman, nicknamed Luthia by scientists. Can she tell us who the first Americans were? Walter Neves is a physical anthropologist at Sao Paulo University in Brazil. He has been using a standard and reliable archaeological measure, the shape of the skull, to find out what race she belonged to.
91.
He fully expected Luthia to be a Mongoloid, an ancestor of the American Indians.
91.
But then he fed the measurements into the computer.
When we started running the computer and seeing the results, it was amazing because we realized that the statistics, the quantitative analysis we were doing was not showing these people to be Mongoloid. In fact, the analysis was showing these people was anything except Mongoloid.
Who then was Luthia? And where did she come from? To find out, the skull was taken to a hospital in Rio de Janeiro to begin the process of reconstructing her face. The first stage was to perform a three-dimensional CAT scan of Luthia's skull in order to build a replica. The cast was then given to Richard Neve of the University of Manchester and one of the world's leading forensic artists to recreate her features.
That to me is a Negroid face that has all the features you associate with a Negroid face. The proportions of the face, it doesn't say anything about it.
Moderator for the program. We have two very special guests. One is Dr. Yosef Ben Yakanan, who is an African anthropologist, an educator, an author, and a scholar. He's on my right, and on my left is Dr. George Simmons. Dr. Simmons is also a professor. He was born in the St. Croix, the Virgin Islands, USA. And we will discuss a number of topics this evening. These gentlemen are here to talk about African origins. As you know, in America, Black History Month is celebrated every February. Without further ado, let's get right into it, because I know they have some interesting viewpoints that will stimulate your thinking, even if you disagree with them or agree. I'm going to call you Dr. Ben, if that's okay, because I understand that's what people usually call you.
Yes.
One of the more controversial positions that you take is that black Africans landed in America 2,000 years before Columbus.
I would not specify the day, but probably exceeding 2,000 years. The fact is that Columbus never came to the United States of America or North and South America. He came as close as San Salvador. There's a rumor that says that Columbus came to America. He did not come to America. He came to an island off America. Vespucci came to America, not Columbus. He came to the Caribbeans. But it is commonly stated, just as much as they state, that Columbus discovered America while the Indians sat down and watched him doing it. Now, but the knowledge of Africans in the Americas quite knowledgeable to scholars. The fact that it's suppressed doesn't have any validity at all.
Let me bounce a couple of things off of you. One thing, this article that I'm going to be referring to our home audience and to our studio audience, this article came out in the September 1981 issue of Science Digest, and it's entitled Black Kings in Ancient America. You and some other black scholars believe that these people, African people, came to this continent before Columbus.
We don't believe, we know.
How do you know? What evidence?
The evidence is there. For example, when you go to Central America, the Yucatan Peninsula, and at Ecuador and places like that, they have caches of Carthaginian money found 200 feet down in the ground, meaning that there were pluvial disruptions, and those money was buried. So it indicates a period of time, at least from that, when you look at the stratas, you could tell the period of time in which they've been here. And when you're talking about Carthage, you're talking about at least 212 BC, when Carthage was finally destroyed by the Romans. Again, the Queen Makeda, which you call the Queen of Sheba, there are maps which Rome, the church in Rome, the so-called Holy Father, has suppressed these maps from the time of Justinian, showing South America and what is today called Central America. The maps there, and Victoria, Makeda goes back to at least 892 BC.
Before Christ.
Before the
Let me point out another thing, just from the same article. I don't know if we can see this on television, but here is a picture. Tell me what this is, and why do you see this as proof of the presence of Africans in America before?
That is the head of an olmec. And the Olmecs were said to be the first of the indigenous Americans. And if you look, if an Olmec walked in here, then you would believe that he had come from the middle of Africa. And there is no doubt about it that all of the writers prior to racism admitted that the Olmecs were in fact Africans who had come across here. There is no doubt when Pigafetta and others, the point is that Van Sertima is writing and others, but Leo Weiner in 1938 at Harvard University wrote a 2-volume book for which he was fired about the Africans, Olmecs being Africans. And
let me bounce this off of you, okay? You take the same statue. You say, well, you say that they're obviously black features, thick lips, broad nose.
The stereotype.
But, okay, the stereotype. Other anthropologists say, I think Michael Cole was one of them. He says that this is not a black man. He said the people who made these statues, which I understand are 8 feet high, the people who made these statues didn't have sharp enough tools to give them white features, so they're not really black statues. They're white people carved with crude tools. What's your response to that?
It's strange that the tools were not sharp enough to make narrow noses, but it was sharp enough to put eyelids. So it would seem to me that an eyelid is harder to make than a thin nose. But Michael Cole is no less a racist than the head of the Ku Klux Klan. I mean, what's the difference between Michael Cole Reagan and the Ku Klux Klan? It have the same philosophy. What is the difference between the fellows writing the Bible and write about the Queen of Sheba saying to Solomon, look not, ye daughters of Kedar, look not upon me because I'm black. My parents sent me in the vineyard and that's all this nonsense. She's black because nature made her black. Her mother and father were black. That's why she's black. Had nothing to do with going in any vineyard, even though it's in the Bible.
Okay, you talked about religion. We're going to get to that in a while. Let me turn to Dr. Simmons. You also agreed with this position that Africans were in this...
I have no problem, no doubt. Why? As a matter of fact, speaking about, like Dr. Ben mentioned, and you spoke about Michael Nico, I own a book several years ago and still have it in my possession by Michael Nico himself, who is considered one of America's leading archaeologists and anthropologists from Yale, one of America's most prestigious schools. In his own work, he referred to them as Negroid. And he went further to state the title of the book is America's First Civilization, what you call civilization. And to turn around and to tell these youngsters and other people in America in particular that the black men were the first to build any type of civilization in the Americas will be disturbing to Americans. And so...
Let me ask you this.
Yes.
Even if you're right, let's say you're right, what difference does it make?
It makes a lot of difference.
What kind of difference?
It takes the inferiority complex out of the black man who felt that his only beginning and relationship here in this part of the world is that of slavery. Then it puts him in the driver's seat because, again, they don't tell you that there are man-made hills within the United States. They call them mounds. And they range from in the Midwest all the way down the eastern seacoast of the United States. And they have found artifacts in them that are similar to things found in West Africa and in Egypt, which is Northeast Africa, that predates the arrival of the so-called indigenous Indians to these lands. Another thing is some years ago, one of the major television networks back in New York, I don't remember exactly which one, ABC or which, had did a documentary, and they said that these olmecs are the ones who brought right into the Americas about 3000 BC. To tell blacks that they ought to be glad to enter into these schools of higher learning today in order to read and write, because their ancestors back in Africa couldn't read and write. You see what it will do to tell them that they brought right into the Americas? Antonio Pigafetta, that Dr. Ben mentioned, who sailed with Magellan when Magellan came to the so-called New World in 1519, when they landed at the land of Verzin, which we now call Brazil, they were met by people in canoes that carried as many as 40 people. And Antonio Pigafetta recorded that these people were jet black. It seemed that they came out of the infernal marshes. That meant that they were burnt. He said, naked and black as they are, in 1519, 27 years after Columbus's arrival to the so-called New World. Another thing they don't tell you, again, you heard my associate...
Well, why haven't we heard these things before? Why don't we read them in the New York Times, the Birmingham News?
If I stole another man's country, and I brought your ancestors here to work for me, could I tell you how great your ancestors were and still expect to keep you in slavery?
Step back a point. The hardest part I've seen in my fight, and I'm the chief of the tribe, is when you come up against people of color as well as European descent, and you say Indians, they're looking for the Bill Cody, Long Ranger Tonto style thing. And when you actually show them that the indigenous people were actually my color, as I have a habit of telling people, a cocoa brown, or a brown piece of leather well put together. I have a lot of ways of using slangs to tell people that we are still here because we were not weak. We were here before DeSoto and Christopher Columbus. You have to be strong to make it through those disasters.